What if a man with no father, no mother, and no beginning walked the earth bearing the authority of the divine? Can a single encounter in the ancient world unveil a celestial mystery that spans the ages? How could a priest-king cloaked in shadow hold the key to the eternal reign of Christ? What secrets does the name Melchizedek whisper, linking the dawn of faith to the end of time? Are you ready to uncover a biblical enigma that might forever change your understanding of righteousness and peace? In the sun-scorched lands of Canaan, a patriarch returns victorious, unaware that a divine encounter awaits. A mysterious figure emerges from the mists of history, his presence a harbinger of a truth beyond mortal comprehension. The air in the valley of Siddim is heavy with the scent of blood and dust, the ground still trembling from the clash of swords, the cries of fallen warriors echoing faintly in the distance. The sun hangs low, its golden light casting long shadows over the battlefield, where the earth is scarred with the marks of war, shattered spears, torn banners, and the footprints of fleeing kings. A faint breeze carries the distant sound of a shepherd's flute, a mournful melody that weaves through the silence as if the land itself mourns the violence that has stained its soil, yearning for a peace that seems beyond reach in this age of ruthless dominion. What does it mean to stand in the presence of a man who defies time itself, to witness a moment where the divine touches the earthly, revealing a truth that echoes through eternity? In the ancient land of Canaan, where the dust of the earth bore witness to the rise and fall of kingdoms, a war of epic proportions raged, its echoes reverberating through the annals of history. 9 monarchs, their hearts hardened by ambition, clashed in a struggle for supremacy. Their swords flashing in the sun, their banners raised high in a bid for power over the region's vast resources. On one side stood Chedorlaomer, the tyrannical king of Elam, leading a coalition of ruthless rulers, their armies a storm of iron and fire that swept through the land, leaving destruction in their wake. On the other side, 5 kings, including the rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah, rose in rebellion, their forces united in a desperate bid to break free from Elam's oppressive yoke, their hearts burning with the hope of liberation, their hands stained with the blood of their enemies. The conflict was not merely a battle for land, but a contest for dominion, a war that would determine the fate of the region, its outcome a testament to the will of the gods. Also, the kings believed their altars stained with the blood of sacrifices, their prayers rising like smoke to deities of stone and fire. Amidst this whirlwind of violence, a man named Lot, the nephew of the patriarch Abraham, found himself ensnared his home in Sodom, a casualty of the war, his family captured by Chedorlaomer's forces, his fate sealed as a prisoner in the midst of the devastation. The news reached Abraham, a man of faith, who had no kingdom of his own, no armies to command yet, whose heart burned with a fierce love for his kin, a love that would propel him into the heart of the conflict, a love that would change the course of history. Abraham, armed only with his trained servants, a mere 308 men, launched a daring offensive against the dominating kings. His strategy, a whisper of divine guidance. His courage, a testament to the faith that had led him from Ur to Canaan, from obscurity to destiny. Under the cover of night, he struck with precision his forces, a shadow that moved through the enemy camp, their blades swift and silent, their resolve unshaken by the odds that stood against them. The battle was fierce. The clash of steel, a symphony of chaos, the cries of the wounded, a chorus of sorrow that rose to the heavens. But Abraham's faith was a shield, his determination a sword, and by dawn he had secured an unexpected victory. freeing Lot and his family, reclaiming the spoils of war, and establishing his name as a force to be feared and respected. A patriarch favored by the divine, a man whose legacy would echo through the ages. It was in this moment of triumph, as Abraham returned from the slaughter of the kings, that a figure emerged from the mists of history. His presence, a mystery that would defy understanding his role. A revelation that would bridge the earthly and the divine. Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of the Most High God, appeared without warning, his form cloaked in the robes of a king, his eyes alight with a wisdom that seemed to transcend time, his hands bearing the simple offerings of bread and wine, a gesture that seemed humble yet carried a weight of prophetic significance, a gesture that would echo through the centuries, pointing to a truth far greater than the moment in which it occurred. The name Melchizedek itself was a whisper of the divine, its meaning a revelation that spoke of a deeper reality. In the ancient tongue of the Hebrews, Melchi meant king and Zedek meant righteousness, a title that declared him the king of righteousness, a ruler whose authority was rooted not in the laws of men, but in the character of God himself. Righteousness in the biblical sense was not merely adherence to human justice, but a reflection of the divine nature, a purity that transcended the corruption of the world, the holiness that spoke of the Most High. And yet, Melchizedek was more than a king of righteousness. He was also the king of peace, for he ruled over Salem, a name that bore the root of shalom, the Hebrew word for peace. A peace that was not merely the absence of war, but the presence of divine harmony. A peace that would one day be fulfilled in the reign of another. But what city was this Salem over which Melchizedek reigned with such celestial authority? The Jerusalem that would later become the spiritual epicenter of the world, the city of David. The site of the temple did not yet exist as the capital of Israel. Yet Salem stood as an ancient precursor. Its name, a whisper of the future, its stones bearing the weight of a divine plan that would unfold through the ages. The Bible would later call Jerusalem the city of God, the place where Christ would reign, where the temple would stand, where the divine presence would dwell among men. If Melchizedek ruled over Salem long before the rise of Israel, before the conquests of David, before the building of the temple, then his presence there was no mere coincidence. It was a foreshadowing, a sign, a shadow of a kingdom yet to come, a kingdom where righteousness and peace would reign eternal, a kingdom that would be established by another priest king, one whose name would echo through the ages as the Son of God. Abraham, the patriarch of faith, stood in the presence of this enigmatic figure, his heart still pounding from the battle, his hands stained with the dust of war, his eyes fixed on the man who had appeared as if from the divine itself. Before Melchizedek, Abraham bowed a gesture of deep recognition, a submission that spoke of a spiritual authority greater than his own, a submission that would reverberate through the history of faith. He gave Melchizedek a tenth of all he had taken in the battle, a tithe offered not by compulsion but by reverence, a tithe that predated the law of Moses, a tithe that spoke of a covenant older than the Levitical priesthood, a covenant rooted in the eternal, a covenant that would find its fulfillment in a greater priest, a greater king, a greater sacrifice. What did it mean for Abraham, the father of faith, to bow before a man with no recorded lineage to offer a tithe to a priest who stood outside the bounds of time? The law of Moses, which would later establish the Levitical priesthood, was still centuries away. Its rituals and sacrifices, a shadow of the divine plan that was already at work, in the encounter between Abraham and Melchizedek. The Levites, descendants of Abraham through Levi, would serve as priests under the law, offering sacrifices for the sins of the people, interceding in the temple. Their authority rooted in their lineage, their role defined by the statutes of Moses. But Melchizedek's priesthood was of a different order, an eternal order, a heavenly order, an order that existed before the law, an order that would surpass the law, an order that would find its fulfillment in the one who would come as the high priest forever. Melchizedek accepted Abraham's tithe, his hand steady as he received the offering, his presence a testament to a spiritual authority that transcended the earthly, a spiritual authority that spoke of the divine, a spiritual authority that would echo through the ages, a spiritual authority that would find its fulfillment in the one who would come as the high priest forever. And then, in a gesture that seemed simple, yet carried a weight of prophetic significance, Melchizedek offered bread and wine, placing them before Abraham as a blessing, a symbol of communion, a symbol of covenant, a symbol that would reverberate through the centuries, pointing to a moment when another would take bread and wine, declaring, "This is my body, this is my blood," a moment when the eternal priesthood would be fulfilled, a moment when the divine would touch the earthly in the ultimate act of love. Centuries later, the psalmist David, a man after God's own heart, would pen words that would unveil the mystery of Melchizedek, words that would point to a future yet to come, words that would echo through the ages as a prophecy of the divine plan. In Psalm 110, David declared, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek," a statement that would remain a mystery for generations, its meaning hidden in the shadows of time, its fulfillment awaiting the arrival of the one who would embody the eternal priesthood, the one who would reign as King of righteousness and King of peace, the one who would establish a kingdom that would never end. David, a king of Judah, was not a priest, nor could any of the Levitical priests claim the title of eternal priest, for their roles were bound by the law, their lives limited by the span of mortal years. But David's words were not for his time, they were for a time yet to come. A time when the Messiah would rise, a time when the eternal priesthood would be revealed, a time when the divine plan would unfold in all its glory. The mystery of Melchizedek deepened as the centuries passed, its meaning a whisper in the hearts of the faithful, its significance a shadow that stretched across the ages, awaiting the light of revelation. In the New Testament, the author of Hebrews would unveil the truth, declaring that Jesus Christ, the promised Messiah, was not a priest according to the Levitical order, but according to the order of Melchizedek, a heavenly priesthood, an eternal priesthood, a priesthood that surpassed the law, a priesthood that would intercede for humanity forever. Jesus, born of the tribe of Judah, could not claim the Levitical priesthood, for the law reserved that role for the descendants of Levi. But the law was a shadow, a temporary measure, a preparation for the greater covenant that would come through Christ, a covenant sealed by his blood, a covenant that would establish him as the high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. What did it mean for Jesus to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek? The Levitical priests offered sacrifices that could never fully atone for sin. Their rituals, a temporary measure, their lives bound by the limitations of mortality, their intercession, a shadow of the greater intercession that would come. But Jesus, as a priest, after the order of Melchizedek, offered a single perfect sacrifice. His own life, his own blood, shed on the cross for the redemption of humanity, a sacrifice that would atone for sin once and for all, a sacrifice that would establish a new covenant, a covenant of grace, a covenant of love, a covenant that would endure forever. He ministers not in an earthly temple, but in the heavenly sanctuary. His intercession, eternal. His priesthood, unending. His authority, rooted not in lineage, but in the divine oath of God. Himself, a priesthood that would never be revoked. A priesthood that would intercede for his people forever. A priesthood that would establish a kingdom of righteousness and peace. The connection between Melchizedek and Christ was not merely a matter of priesthood, but a matter of prophecy, a matter of fulfillment, a matter of divine plan that spanned the ages. When Melchizedek offered bread and wine to Abraham, he foreshadowed the moment when Christ would offer the same elements to his disciples, declaring them symbols of his body and blood, symbols of the new covenant, symbols of the eternal sacrifice that would redeem humanity, symbols that would echo through the ages as a testament to the love of God, a love that transcends time, a love that transcends death, a love that endures forever. But what of Melchizedek himself? Who was this enigmatic figure, this man with no father, no mother, no genealogy, no beginning and no end? The author of Hebrews offers a tantalizing clue, declaring that Melchizedek was without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. The absence of genealogy was a striking omission in a book so meticulous about lineage, a book that traced the descendants of Adam, of Noah, of Abraham with painstaking detail. Yet Melchizedek stood apart, his origin shrouded in mystery, his existence a whisper of the eternal, his priesthood a shadow of the divine, a shadow that pointed to Christ, a shadow that spoke of a priesthood that transcended time, a priesthood that would intercede for humanity forever, a priesthood that would establish a kingdom of righteousness and peace. Some have speculated that Melchizedek was a manifestation of Christ himself, a Christophany, an appearance of the pre-incarnate Son of God in the Old Testament, a figure who walked the earth to bless Abraham, to receive his tithe, to foreshadow the eternal priesthood that would come through the cross. Others have proposed that he was Shem, the son of Noah, a patriarch who lived long enough to encounter Abraham, a man who might have taken on the role of priest-king in the absence of a formal priesthood. But Shem's genealogy is recorded in Scripture, his life bound by the span of mortal years, his role a shadow of the greater role that Melchizedek would play, a role that transcended genealogy, a role that transcended time, a role that pointed to the eternal priesthood of Christ. Still others have suggested that Melchizedek was an angelic being, a celestial messenger sent to bless Abraham, to receive his tithe, to foreshadow the eternal priesthood that would come through Christ. But angels in Scripture are not called kings, nor do they rule over earthly cities. Their roles as messengers of the divine, a shadow of the greater role that Melchizedek would play, a role that spoke of a kingdom, a priesthood, a divine authority that transcended the angelic, a divine authority that pointed to the eternal priesthood of Christ. The most compelling theory, however, is that Melchizedek was a type of Christ, a figure whose life and ministry foreshadowed the greater ministry that would come through the Son of God, a figure whose eternal priesthood pointed to the eternal priesthood of Christ, a figure whose reign as King of righteousness and King of peace pointed to the reign of Christ as the ultimate King of righteousness and King of peace, a reign that would establish a kingdom that would never end, a kingdom that would fulfill the divine plan that spanned the ages, a kingdom that would bring righteousness and peace to a world in need of redemption, The significance of Melchizedek's encounter with Abraham was not merely a moment in history, but a moment in eternity, a moment that pointed to the divine plan that would unfold through the ages, a moment that spoke of a priesthood that transcended the law, a priesthood that transcended time, a priesthood that would intercede for humanity forever. The Levitical priesthood, established under the law of Moses, was a temporary measure, a shadow of the greater priesthood that would come through Christ, a shadow that would find its fulfillment in the eternal priesthood of Melchizedek, an eternal priesthood that would offer a single perfect sacrifice, an eternal priesthood that would minister in the heavenly sanctuary, an eternal priesthood that would intercede for humanity forever, an eternal priesthood that would establish a kingdom of righteousness and peace. The bread and wine that Melchizedek offered to Abraham were not merely a gesture of hospitality, but a prophetic symbol, foreshadowing of the moment when Christ would offer the same elements to his disciples, declaring them symbols of his body and blood, symbols of the new covenant, symbols of the eternal sacrifice that would redeem humanity, symbols that would echo through the ages as a testament to the love of God, a love that transcends time, a love that transcends death, a love that endures forever. The bread and wine were a whisper of the future, a whisper of the cross, a whisper of the moment when the eternal priesthood would be fulfilled, a moment when the divine would touch the earthly in the ultimate act of love, a moment when the King of righteousness and the King of peace would offer himself as the ultimate sacrifice, a moment that would echo through the ages as a testament to the love of God, a love that endures forever, a love that calls the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. The connection between Melchizedek and Christ was not merely a matter of priesthood, but a matter of prophecy, a matter of fulfillment, a matter of divine plan that spanned the ages, a divine plan that pointed to the future, to the ultimate reign of Christ, to the establishment of a kingdom that would never end, a kingdom of righteousness and peace, a kingdom where the divine presence would dwell among men, a kingdom where the eternal priesthood would intercede forever. The book of Revelation speaks of Christ as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, reigning with justice, establishing a kingdom of peace, a kingdom that echoes the reign of Melchizedek as the King of righteousness and the King of peace, a kingdom that fulfills the divine plan that began in the encounter between Abraham and Melchizedek, a kingdom that will be established in the new heaven and the new earth, where there will be no more sin, no more death, no more corruption, where the eternal priesthood of Christ will intercede forever, where the love of God will reign eternal. The encounter between Abraham and Melchizedek was a moment in eternity, a moment that pointed to the divine plan that would unfold through the ages, a moment that spoke of a priesthood that transcended the law, a priesthood that transcended time, a priesthood that would intercede for humanity forever, a moment that called the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls, a moment that echoed the love of the divine, a love that transcends time, a love that transcends death, a love that endures forever. Melchizedek's eternal priesthood was a whisper of the future, a whisper of the cross, a whisper of the moment when Christ would offer himself as the ultimate sacrifice, a moment that would redeem humanity, a moment that would establish a new covenant, a moment that would echo through the ages as a testament to the love of God, a love that calls the world to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls, a bridge that leads us to the heart of the divine, where love endures forever, where the light of Christ shines eternal. guiding us through the storms of life, calling us to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls. What does it mean to stand in the shadow of an eternal priesthood, to bear witness to a mystery that spans the ages, to be called by a love that endures forever, a love that calls us to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls, a bridge that leads us to the heart of the divine, where the King of righteousness and the King of peace reigns eternal, where the love of God shines like a beacon in the darkness, calling us to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls, a bridge that leads us to the eternal dawn, where the love of the divine awaits us shining like a beacon in the darkness, calling us to be a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a bridge in a world of walls.